let's just jump in. There was a big week in sports.
Oh, hang on, let me just jump in on that. 16-0, Carson Wentz.
I mean, you said it right there. That's pretty good.
Super Bowl bound. How about that Philly college sports, huh?
Oh, hey, do you guys know I'm going to grad school?
I'm going to Villanova,
You
right?
going to Villanova? You going to Villanova?
Yeah.
We're all going to Villanova.
Don't you do
But first, before we go to Villanova, this is SportsZone.
Hello and welcome to another episode of SportsZone. This is episode number 2. The semester is rolling and we are churning out content for you. This is Studio 90. I'm joined by Vikram and Jessica, and I think it's the best time of the year. Champions League for soccer is starting this week, the first round of group matchups. There's a couple interesting matchups, but I think there's more interesting storylines going into this season. We've got some teams who are considered favorites kind of struggling out of the gates, and maybe we'll see that form replicated in the Champions League, and some teams coming out and playing really well. So I think, Vikram, we'll start with you. Barcelona, always kind of a shoo-in to at least make it to the Final Four. They had a little bit of transfer activity. They lost Dani Alves, one of their more veteran players and maybe experienced players in the Champions League, having to shake up their defense a little bit, but they struggled out of the gates. They lost to a newly promoted team. It's their earliest loss in the league in, I think, 6 or 7 years. They're in a group with Manchester City, who's playing really well. Do you think there's going to be any lingering effects in this opening match day from that shocking loss?
I think the opening game will be fine for Barcelona because they have a big squad now. They had a good transfer market. They got in 6 or 7 players. They have a huge depth now. I mean, the loss against a small team will hurt them a lot, but they should be fine for the first game in the UCL.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And Jessica, I think we'll talk about the other big Spanish team, Real Madrid. They started the season fine, but I think the bigger story is Cristiano Ronaldo is back from his injury. He got hurt in the European Championship final. He's back. I think a question, I guess, would be, they've got Karim Benzema and they've got Alvaro Morata, both strikers. Do you think they're going to rely on one more in the league and one more in the Champions League? How do you think that's going to shake out for them?
I can definitely see that happening. Real Madrid is usually pretty good about, they usually do pretty well in the Champions League. They'll do pretty well in the La Liga. And I think that in terms of relying on one over the other, I think that it'll be the same weight for both of them, just because, they would want to defend their title.
Definitely. There was a lot of strain for Real Madrid to retain the services of Alvaro Morata, so it would lead you to believe that they think he's going to play a big part in their season, but Benzema is a very talented player and scores a lot of goals from in his own right. Shifting from Spain to England, we touched on Manchester City starting the season really hot. Another team who's always in the Champions League, but the past few seasons hasn't really fared so well, and that's Arsenal. They've got PSG in their opening match. PSG struggled in their opening couple of games in the French league, and they've got a couple players injured. Do you think that's a chance, Vikram, for Arsenal to maybe nip PSG while they're down a little bit, as they've struggled in the group stages in the past?
I think this is going to be a great game. PSG have lost a couple of games before this. Arsenal have not been their best, so it'll be good to see how they come up together. I think Arsenal has a good chance to beat them, and I think they will beat them. So PSG need to tighten up a bit now.
Definitely. PSG, a lot of defensive injuries, but you mentioned it, Arsenal out of the gate really hasn't hit their stride. They beat Watford, and that's really the only game, at least in the first half, where they looked good. They've struggled to win, they've lost, they've drew. So it'll be interesting to see how they do. Another team who's really struggled in the league, maybe to be expected, we talked about this last week, is Leicester City. And they're in the Champions League for the first time. It's completely new. They had a limited squad last year, so it'll be interesting, Jessica, to see how they compensate having at least 6 games in the Champions League. Do you think that their performance is really going to be affected by their limited squad?
I do think so, just because they haven't been doing really well in the Premier League to start off, and I think that that's also gonna transfer over to the Champions. I think they'll probably make it out of their group, but I don't think they'll make it very far in the tournament.
Yeah, Leicester City maybe fortuitously got a very easy draw, so the cards may be in their favor, but I think they're definitely going to struggle a little bit. And I think quickly I'll ask each of you, who do you think maybe is going to be a surprise package in the Champions League this year? Vikram, we'll start with you.
Surprise package. I think.
You've got some teams, maybe Dortmund. I think Basel could shock a couple people. They've given Chelsea and Liverpool some difficulty in the past. Those are two teams who I could see maybe being a little bit unexpected.
I think Tottenham would go to round of 16, but I don't see them going past that. But that would be a good thing. Even Leicester, for that matter, because they have an easy group,
Right.
they might reach the round of 16, which is a good thing for them, as it's their first Champions League.
Definitely.
So I think it's tough in UCL. You have top teams who will play well: Juventus, Bayern, Barca,
Right.
Madrid. So it's tough for a underdog to go through to semi-finals.
Jessica, and for you?
I agree. I think that Tottenham might surprise people in the Champions League.
Yeah, Mauricio Pochettino definitely has those guys well conditioned. They play well, and they were really good and kind of tired at the back end of this last season, but they've started this season fairly well as well. Those will all be teams to keep an eye on as the Champions League gets underway this Tuesday and Wednesday. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for Studio 90, so stick around for more Sports Zone after this.
Hello and welcome back to SportsZone. This is going to be our baseball segment. We are getting to third base. I'm Dan. I've got Vince with me here today. And we are going to start with a topic I did not ever think we'd be talking about on getting to third base, and that is Tim Tebow. As you may or may not have heard, but you probably did because ESPN eats, sleeps, and breathes Tim Tebow. Tim Tebow was signed to a minor league contract by my New York Mets for some reason. So he will be playing in the instructional leagues in their system after he held his much talked about tryout for all these teams after wanting to go to baseball after pretty much flaming out of the NFL.
Right.
So, what do you think of Tim Tebow's chances to become a professional baseball player?
Well, I think for the Mets, it's really a no-risk situation for them. They sign him, it gets the headlines, it gets everyone talking. And if he pans out, they look like the biggest geniuses ever, and we all look like idiots for saying, oh, Tim Tebow can't play baseball. But if it doesn't work out, I think that's the expectation. So that's what everyone thinks is going to happen. Maybe I think it's good for whatever small team he winds up in the minor leagues. They get a lot of fanfare and a lot of attraction for Tim Tebow being there. But, I mean, personally, I don't think it's going to pan out. I think it was an attention grab for whoever was going to sign him. And I think that's really why teams took a chance on him, is because he's a big name. If he was, some young prospect with the same level of skills, I don't think there would be as much attention around him. I think just Tim Tebow and the attention that he brings. But I think it's a no-risk situation for the Mets, really.
Yeah, I am with you. For me, I view Tim Tebow, I feel like his game would play a lot like Rick Ankiel, as an example. Not pitcher Rick Ankiel, outfielder Rick Ankiel, where he, from the left side, he's got a cannon of an arm from the outfield, couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, and maybe he'll run into a home run every now and then. He can be a bench player. That I kind of view as the ceiling. I'm not sure. Tim Tebow is not going to be Ken Griffey Jr. Yeah. So now we'll shift from minor league kind of baseball player to actual real baseball that's happening, because it's September. We're in the middle of pennant races and division races and wildcard races. And for the most part, the divisions are almost set. But what isn't set is the wild cards. The wild cards are really tight, like really, really tight right now. So we'll start with the American League. We actually have a tie at the top, which already is like super interesting because of the new format of the wild cards, right? So the two wild card teams have to play each other in the first game of the playoffs officially in order to move on to the division series. So in the American League, Toronto and Baltimore are tied at the top. So if the season ended right now, I don't know if it'd be a coin flip or an additional game to decide who gets to host that wild card game. So they're currently tied at the top, and both, I think, 2 out of the AL East.
Right.
And then they're followed closely Detroit and the Yankees, only 2 out of the wild card. So this one's going to come probably down all the way to the end. What are your thoughts on the AL wild card race? Who do you see taking it?
I could see it shaking out how it is now. The Yankees kind of got hot. They lost now, so we'll see how they react to that. Baltimore had a big series over the weekend with Detroit. I think Chris Tillman played really well for Baltimore, so they got a little bit of separation when Detroit could have closed the gap. Toronto got a lot of offensive firepower. It's going to be close down the stretch. I think I've got a gut feeling that there's going to be 2 AL East teams making it, and I feel like the Yankees may fall by the wayside a little bit, so it may be kind of a boring answer, but I think tentatively at the moment, I think Toronto and Baltimore will hold serve, and I don't know who will be hosting the one-game playoff, but I think those are 2 wild card teams that we'll see.
Well, it definitely is going to be interesting. I think the AL East teams play each other almost every game for the rest of the way. So it totally could, you never really know what's going to happen. If you get a sweep from one team, a sweep from another, who knows what could happen? Say the Yankees sweep the Blue Jays, then they just vault into that second spot, It's totally up for grabs. But I'm with you. I think we're going to see 3 AL East teams in the playoffs this year.
It's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Shifting to the National League, the wild card race is still pretty tight. The Giants all of a sudden starting to get a little hot, have the first spot 1.5 games up. The Mets currently sitting in the second spot and trailed closely by the Cardinals, who are just half a game out. It's really a 3-horse race there.
Yeah.
Miami and Pittsburgh falling behind and running out of time to catch up. So even with the Giants starting to get hot a little bit, the Mets all of a sudden look pretty good too. They've won 12 of 16.
Right.
And despite a patchwork pitching staff, and the Cardinals always a postseason threat every single year, even if they're 15 out of the division. How do you see that race shaking up?
Well, at the moment the Giants are getting hot. They really kind of came out of the All-Star break stumbling and really played poorly, but they seem to be getting hot now. They got a big result over the weekend. They swept the Diamondbacks to kind of vault them in the right direction. As you said, the Mets are red hot. But, the Mets and the Cardinals both have big series at the beginning of the week. We said the division races are all done and dusted, but that doesn't mean that those teams are, done playing. The Mets play the Nationals, and then the Cardinals play the Cubs. So this will be, with the season coming down the line, 3 games against the division, that could decide, if one team gets swept, 3 games could be an insurmountable deficit once it all shakes out.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. As you said, Mets are actually they're in town here, play the Nats. Our very own Kristen is at the game right now.
Yep.
Go Mets, go Kristen. So yeah, it should be very interesting. Obviously, I'm pro Mets, so I wear my affiliations on my sleeve. But that's that, and I think it'll be interesting to see if the Giants can pull away, and if the Mets and Cardinals just jockey back and forth. If the Giants do, it's going to be tough. They're going to throw Bumgarner in that wild card game. It's going to be a tough matchup for anyone.
I tell you from experience, it doesn't turn out well for you.
Yeah, the Pirates famously wild card game 3 years in a row.
Yeah, look at them now. That's when you lose 8 games in a row, it really kind of does a number on your playoff hopes.
It does. That is all the time we have. We're being yelled at from the behind the scenes that we were out of time. Keep it locked here from SportsZone. We'll have more on the wild card races next week because it's only going to get more fun from here as they run out of games to play. We have more SportsZone coming up right after this.
Hello and welcome back to more SportsZone. This is our fantasy segment, The Galleon in the Gridiron. I am Jake Elms and I'm joined here by Ryan Siegel, and we are here to talk about the sleepers, tricks, and skills needed to win in your fantasy league in week 2 and beyond. So we're going to start here with Ryan. What do you think was your biggest surprise performance this week from a fantasy perspective?
I think your biggest surprise performance this week by far had to be Kelvin Benjamin. Nobody really knew where he was going to go coming off from injury, and people didn't really know if Cam Newton was just going to fully let him back in the offense. They were doing really well last year, and obviously they made the Super Bowl with using kind of a Greg Olsen and relying on secondary receivers. But Kelvin Benjamin came out of nowhere and really showed why he's the number 1 receiver in that organization.
All right, I think for me, one of the biggest surprise performances this week, and I hate to go for a good player having a good game, but A.J. Green absolutely dominating and claiming Revis Island as his own. I think a lot of people, obviously anybody who had A.J. Green this week was going to start A.J. Green, but going into that game, I don't think anybody expected we had, you have 150 yards?
180 yards and a touchdown.
Just absolutely dominated Darrelle Revis from start to finish, whose move to safety might be coming sooner than a lot of us expecting. But going from the good, let's go to the bad. What was your biggest disappointing
I gotta
performance this
say,
week?
my biggest disappointing performance had to be Tyler Lockett from Seattle. Tyler Lockett was really kind of expected to, be that deep threat that Russell Wilson needed. Doug Baldwin and Jermaine Kearse are still going to be their two main receivers, but Tyler Lockett was supposed to take a much bigger role in the offense this year. And even on punt returning, because a lot of guys also look for Lockett as a flex position and really as a type of who's going to be a guy who's going to get you points on the punt return and the kick return. But he really was underwhelming, only getting 1 point in standard point leagues this year. So it was this week. So it was very interesting to see how poorly that came out.
Another player who I think underperformed this week, who came from that exact same game, was Jarvis Landry. To me, I know Jarvis Landry is a player who's going against the Seattle Seahawks, but I thought that being just a target slot man, target eating machine, the more that Ryan Tannehill was pressure, I thought the more that Jarvis Landry just eat up those quick slant passes. But really, Jarvis Landry only ended the game with 50, 60 yards, which isn't bad. But for somebody who's playing him in that flex position, I also think that I was expecting a lot more from him this week. Anyway, moving on. This week we had, I'd say there were about there's one major injury and one decently, a tremor, a little bit of an injury. But the big injury coming this week is to my man, Keenan Allen in San Diego, who suffered what is a right knee sprain that may be a torn ACL, but probably just a sprain. But to you, Ryan, what implications do you think that has league-wide?
Oh, that's huge for people who have San Diego wide receivers. San Diego's historically known for being a passing offense, and Keenan Allen's really the target of that passing offense. You're going to have to look a lot more for Antonio Gates, who also gets a lot of catches and a lot of yards. But I think Keenan Allen, I know it's going to hurt your fantasy team a lot, Jake, but I don't know how long he's going to be coming back. And if it's a right knee sprain, and they're probably going to be more cautious with him, it's probably at least 3 or 4 weeks before you get him back at the minimum. So I would consider at least waiting and seeing what the official report is until later in the week, but you're eventually probably going to have to drop him or place him on injured reserve.
No, yeah, that San Diego offense was humming in the first half of that game. Melvin Gordon with not his first, but his first and second touchdown of his pro career. I mean, just losing Keenan Allen, a lot of, I say I'm a big fan of Travis Benjamin, but really as a whole, it's going to hurt that entire offense because they're not going to have that one threatening receiver to take the pressure off the rest of their assets. And also without Stevie Johnson, a lot of people are going to be trying to look at San Diego wide receivers, backups to pick up as waiver wire targets, but I'd be cautious with that. But another injury this week that actually just came out about an hour ago is Robert Griffin being put on injured reserve. I mean, I say the Browns offense, Terrell Pryor had a pretty decent game this week, going for 3 receptions for about 70 yards. And also Corey Coleman is a guy who's been on a lot of teams' radars. Duke Johnson has been a guy. And really now with Josh McCown coming in, do you think that'll hurt the offense overall? Or do you think that Josh McCown will be able to keep up that level of production?
I honestly don't think it's going to make that much big of a difference. I mean, they were having difficulty against the Eagles' defense, and the Eagles' defense is nothing special. They barely put up 10 points offensively. So I really think that either or, I think maybe Josh McCown's an upgrade. I've never been sold on RG3 as a player, and other than his rookie year, he's really have not been able to keep himself healthy. I'd put him in the category with like Jamal Charles, who a guy where he's going to get injured and you just hope that you can milk him as long as you can. But I really don't think it's going to affect the Browns offense too much. Hopefully they get Josh Gordon back in a couple weeks. Hopefully that alleviates the stress a little bit for Josh McCown, but I don't see it happening anytime soon.
No, I'd agree with that. I think that with Josh Gordon coming back, that if you are a poor soul who has invested his fantasy season in somebody on that Browns offense, you'll be just as sad, but not any more sad. Anyway, from all of us here at SportsZone, that's all the time we have for the Gallon in the Gridiron, and more SportsZone is coming at you next.
Hello and welcome back to SportsZone. I am Dan. I'm joined by Ryan, and this is going to be the second edition of our AU Insiders panel. As I said last week, fall sports are in full swing, so there's plenty to talk about, and we're going to open with widely considered to be AU's most successful athletics program, volleyball. Led by Coach Barry Goldberg, who's slowly inching towards, I believe, 700 career victories. But it's a bit of a different team this year than what we saw in the past. Perhaps not as dominant of a team as well. And a couple early season struggles for volleyball this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, however, they have performed well against some bigger teams. They took Washington to 5 sets, but half the team's injured, and then couple that with Monica Smedova who was widely considered by many their best player, is gone. Allison Capolino, who was their top outside hitter and probably their go-to person for kills, also gone. It's hard to play with. It's hard to be successful when half of your starting lineup is injured. But I think they'll be able to regroup just in time for Patriot League play to start, and they should still run through the Patriot League.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. They play a very tough non-conference schedule, which even if they do lose, they're still probably fine for conference play because the Patriot League is hardly a premier athletic conference. But you do bring up a good point. Like, there's a lot of injuries. The team that's playing now is a very young team. Monica Smirnova is probably the best player in the conference for the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, Capolino's gone. Kristina Lewandowska's gone. And, Huakale Dawson's hurt, which is also a big. She was supposed to be like a veteran leader, but she's a bit dinged up. So, a lot of the production coming from some unknowns. Ola Kazawa, for example, and a lot of freshmen are seeing a lot of playing time, which is probably maybe not what they expected, maybe not ideal, but we'll see what they can do. Moving to outside stuff from inside for volleyball was, we will move over to AU men's soccer, who over the last 3 or 4 years has been very, very solid, still searching for a conference title in that time, but they beat good teams. And they've done it again this year. They beat number 25 SMU. I think that was technically last week, so I might have talked about it last week's show. This week, they actually suffered their first loss of the season at the hands of Gonzaga at home, but then came out on Sunday and rebounded well with a 5-goal performance against Cornell. So what are your thoughts on Todd West's bunch?
AU men's soccer is always one of the more underrated but dominating teams. They always find their way in and out of the national top 25 in the country. They win games against teams they shouldn't be winning against, but their biggest issue will be, I want to see how they do in end of October, early November, because that's when they're known to slip and lose a game or two that they shouldn't have lost. They did that last year where they lost a couple Patriot League games that they really were 10 times better than the team they were playing against. So it'll be interesting to see how they do. They normally start off really strong, but I want to see if Todd West and his group can, keep it going as the season progresses.
Oh, I totally agree with you. I think the book on them is, as you said, they beat good teams, but I think they have the tendency sometimes to play down to their opponent, and that's not something you want. You want to, pedal to the metal, as they say, even against bad teams, and run them off the pitch. You don't want to let a team hang around.
No.
So yeah, that's an interesting point. We'll have to see what happens as we get close to conference play starting next week for soccer, both men's and women's, knocking on the door of conference play.
Yeah, a couple weeks.
And shifting one last time, we'll head over to field hockey, another solid program here at American University. Recently played a tournament up at Maryland and played pretty well. They beat Fairfield 4-2. Apparently it was a pretty actually dominating 4-2 as well, before falling to the Terps, though no shame in that. Maryland, of course, significantly more money their athletic programs than we do. But so they are, I think, 4-2 now on the season. A couple good wins, a win over, I believe, a ranked opponent as well. Tough early season slate for them as well. I think they played 4 or 5 teams that have all been around the preseason top 20. And 4-2 is a solid start for that.
Yeah, AU women's field hockey, Steve Jennings' bunch is always ready to play at all time. There, of course, is no fear in losing to Maryland. Maryland is by far one of the top teams in the country, and they always have a dominant athletics program. However, AU constantly keeps putting out good showings against teams that they're not supposed to beat. Like last year, they were in the game with Princeton up until the very end. The AU women's field hockey team obviously has the ability, and I think they have a strong case and maybe even the possibility of giving Boston University a run for their money in the conferences.
Well, it's going to be really interesting because I think the final conference game of the season, AU versus BU at Jacobs Field, could be deciding a regular season championship.
Absolutely.
So that should be interesting. Also, a shout out, I think it was last week, AU actually swept conference awards. Yeah. Natalie Connerth, Angela Virtue, and Maura Jacobs taking Offensive Player of the Week, Defensive Player of the Week, and Goalkeeper of the Week. So big congratulations to them for that. As we said, it was solid. They actually swept that weekend. I think it was last weekend, not this past one. But wanted to give it a mention.
Absolutely.
That's all the time we have here for the AU Insiders panel. Might have chatted a bit too much. But keep watching for more SportsZone coming up after this.
Hello, welcome back to SportsZone. This is Going for Two, our favorite and most popular NFL segment out there on ATV. I'm joined alongside with Dan Lignato and Jake Elmsley. And guys, lots of good matchups this week. A lot of games that really surprised a lot of people. 4 games decided by 1 point. Jake, what do you think was the biggest or most marquee 1-point matchup?
Well, of all the 1-point matches, easily the biggest and marquee one was the first game of the season. I mean, you have Denver versus Carolina, the Super Bowl rematch game everybody was looking at, a game with a lot of storylines, with two teams, probably in the last decade, the two teams we've seen coming off of the Super Bowl had the most turnover and the most changes, the most question marks going into the season. I mean, you had Denver with breaking in their new QB, you had Carolina, a team that had a lot of question marks going into last season that has all the same question marks going into this one, trying to return Kelvin Benjamin, trying to show a new rehauled secondary. And on top of all that, you had a very exciting game broadcast nationwide that ended in a little chilly at the end there.
Yeah, Graham Gano missing at the final time after getting iced by Gary Kubiak, after makes the first 53-yarder, but the second one just was not happening. Trevor Siemian, rookie quarterback out of Denver, never took an NFL snap, is now 1-0 and just beat the defending NFC champions. Now, an interesting storyline also coming out of that game. Cam Newton on the final drive really was getting targeted. He was getting a lot of hits to the head that weren't getting called, lots of helmet-to-helmet contact. Dan, do you think there's like a stereotype or a precedent set by each individual quarterback in the NFL that the referees have?
I do think there are certain quarterbacks who get treated differently than others. I don't want to name names, but if you so much as sneeze on Tom Brady, that's a 15-yard penalty. And I think there's a really valid point, especially if you're going to value player safety, then you cannot allow helmet-to-helmet hits on a quarterback to go uncalled. That's the big thing with this league. They always say, yeah, you care about these concussions. We're trying to make a difference. Except they're saying it, but they're not doing it. And if you're going to have to treat everyone, you're going to have to call it for everyone. You can't just call it for some people. And you can't miss, 5 different helmet-to-helmet hits and call none of them. That should be unacceptable.
Yeah, Newton really got dazed on the last drive. He really could see, as NBC's footage cut to him, he really did not look in the play at all. But concussion protocol felt that he was not needed to be pulled off the field for additional screening. So Dan, I got to ask you, out of all the other one-point matchups, because there were a lot of intriguing matchups, what do you think was by far the most intriguing one-point matchup that was not necessarily it was kind of overshadowed by the Denver-Carolina game?
I think there's a couple really good ones. You definitely look at the in-division match in the NFC East, Giants-Cowboys. I feel like, of course, every division matchup is huge. And, the Cowboys, they've got Ezekiel Elliott, who was, the top rookie coming out of the class. Everyone thought he's going to have a great year. Preseason hero Dak Prescott, who everyone thought, was the savior for the Cowboys. What's he going to do in his first professional start in the regular season? And then the Giants come out and very quietly come away with a win. Victor Cruz back on the field, good to see that. And I think that gives Eli Manning more weapons, which only makes him more dangerous. So the Giants off to a good start in the division. There's also the Raiders and who did the Raiders play this week?
Oh, well, the Raiders and Saints game. I mean, you look
Saints,
at that game.
yeah.
That game was very interesting for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, that game really was not televised across most of the country, but you had two teams that had two teams that their defenses going into the season both had very different storylines. I mean, you had the Saints, who everybody's been saying all offseason is going to have to be carried by Drew Brees, by their skill position players, Brandon Cooks, Michael Thomas, Willie Snead, Mark Ingram. But the Raiders, they were a team who, going into the season, over the offseason, spent a lot of money on their defense, bringing guys like Broussard, Irvin, Sean Smith, Reggie Nelson. But both teams struggled mightily defensively with a game that had a final score of over 70 points. I mean, both quarterbacks threw for, I believe, over 300. I know Drew Brees went for 420, something like that, yardage, but two teams that both struggled defensively. And that should be a little concerning for Raiders fans going into the rest of the season.
I'd have to agree. It was quite a wild offensive scoring week. Lots of scores breaking 20 points on each side. One of those games, and a really interesting and kind of a lot closer than everybody expected, the Green Bay Packers and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Green Bay was up for most of the game, but not by much. It was a one-possession game throughout the game. Dan, do you see Jacksonville kind of trending upwards and maybe not taking that seller spot in the AFC South?
Absolutely. I definitely think you have to look at the Jacksonville as an up-and-coming team. They've got a very young core, especially on the offensive side, which has a lot of talent. You got Blake Bortles, Allen Robinson, Allen Hurns, Julius Thomas, who we talked about before this segment started. This is a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball, and if their young defensive players can stay on the field and produce the way they could, you got Miles Jack, who missed all of last year after he blew out his knee in training camp. Jalen Ramsey, first-round pick from this year. So if these first-round picks add out or come and work out, and these are high first-round picks too, because the Jaguars have still not quite been able to take the next step, then I think you could look at the Jaguars as potentially threatening, maybe for a wild card spot, even towards the top of that division, where you don't really know necessarily who's going to run away with it. Is Indy as good as we thought they were 2 or 3 years ago? What is Houston going to get with Brock Osweiler? We don't know. So that division could be up for grabs, and I think the Jaguars are a team to watch.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you there. I mean, Jacksonville's been a team that I've been talking about a lot this offseason. I really like what they did, and I saw this game as a coming out party for them. I mean, really, the end of that game, they were the 4th and 3 or 4 call close to the goal line for them at the end of that game. I find very questionable. I mean, they're one good play, one maybe 7-8 yard pass away from beating the Green Bay Packers opening day. I mean, plus they had to do that without Chris Ivory, who had to leave, who was a healthy scratch almost hours before the game when he was gone to the hospital with some sort of illness. So, I mean, I really do think that the Jacksonville Jaguars have a chance in an AFC South that has a ton of questions throughout the entire division.
Yeah, obviously you don't have to worry about Brock Osweiler in Houston. Will he be able to mesh well with DeAndre Hopkins and Bill O'Reilly's coaching, which is a heavily high-powered offense, as Bill O'Reilly's had run at Penn State and even at New England beforehand. And Andrew Luck even has kind of shown that he's, at least after his Week 1 performance, that he's back and he's ready to go after last year. But final question of the segment, just quickly give me your Week 2 marquee matchup. So we'll start with Jake.
Oh, for me, well, I mean, one that's kind of going to go under the radar, but a matchup that I'm real interested in is Chiefs and Titans. I mean, Chiefs and Texans. I mean, you saw the first drive of the game, Brock Osweiler threw a pick, and I'm sure all of his critics, including myself, a lot of people were probably saying, well, this is what was to be expected. They handed him out, but then he was able to lead them to win that game. And mind you, it's only the Bears who have a defense that's like a sponge, but still, he was able to bring them to a victory and really utilize Will Fuller, who was another receiver coming in who was a lot of question marks around him. He was able to end that game averaging about 20 yards per reception with about 106 yards. And also the Chiefs, a team who last year started off 1-5 and then went on that 10-game winning stretch before falling to the Patriots in the divisional round. Really the two teams that have been up and coming in the AFC, and it'll be interesting to see them clash. Kind of that second right below New England, see if they're in that second like below New England Denver tier in the AFC.
Dan?
I'm going to take another divisional matchup. I seem to like them. But Bengals Steelers. These teams jostle for the top spot in their division every year. The Ravens, I think, a little questionable, with a lot of people coming off injuries there. So I think this is an early season matchup that could end up looking down the line, could end up determining part of who wins that AFC North. It's going to be a good battle between these two teams. Really perennial playoff contenders, both of them. And both good offenses. You got Big Ben Antonio Brown and Andy Dalton, AJ Green. And we'll see who gets the best. I think that's going to be a good one.
I'm going to take another divisional matchup. I'm going to take Seahawks-Rams, first game in the Los Angeles Coliseum. Professional football is back in Los Angeles. Will Jared Goff start? Nobody really knows. Case Keenum obviously got the ball in Week 1. It'll be very interesting to see whether or not Jeff Fisher finally thinks that Goff is ready. But in a home opener in the Coliseum against a very, very good Seattle Seahawks team that has been the dominant force in that division for the last 2 years, last two, three years, being an NFC champion in the last 3 of 4. It's going to be very interesting to see how the LA Rams handle it and how the Rams get for a fan turnout. But anyway, that's all the time we have for Going for 2 this week. Stay tuned for more SportsZone after this. Hello, welcome back to SportsZone. This is Ice Time. I'm your host, Ryan Siegel, and there's a lot to talk about this week in the world of ice hockey. The biggest and probably most developing story as it's coming towards as we approach the NHL season is the 2016 World Cup of Hockey, which is set to begin in 2 weeks in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Through the next 2 weeks, we have seen a number of exhibition games being taken place all around the world, from Finland and Russia to right in our home backyard in Washington, D.C. There's plenty of preview games that everybody will be able to watch. They will be all streamed on the ESPN family of networks. Focusing on the 2 biggest games and the 2 closest to our backyard, the United States will be taking on Finland on Tuesday. It'll be very interesting to see guys like TJ Oshie and John Carlson for their first time this year, as this is really kind of an exhibition tune-up tournament with lots of incentive and bragging rights to be the inaugural World Cup of Hockey champions. They're taking a Finnish side, which is still far older but a very experienced club in international hockey. The Finns don't have Teemu Selanne anymore, but they still rely heavily on goaltender Tuukka Rask to power their defensive front and then eventually lead towards their offense. So the USA-Finland should be a very, very intriguing matchup. Wednesday, also at the Verizon Center, there will be the matchup between Team Europe and Team Sweden. Andrzej Kopitar was just named captain of Team Europe last week. So it'll be very interesting to see guys like Nick Backstrom come and take on Team Europe. The Swedes were runner-ups in the Olympics in 2014. So it'll be very interesting to see how they turn out in the World Cup of Hockey. We possibly could see another Sweden-Canada matchup. I got to say, my team that I feel is going to turn a lot of heads this World Cup is Team North America. Team North America comprised of the best under 23 players from the United States and Canada. It'll be a very rare chance where you get to see Connor McDavid and Jack Eichel on the same ice at the same time on the same side of the puck and the same side of the ice trying to make a statement for the younger guys. They will also be coupled with Johnny Gaudreau and Shane Gostisbehere, other young NHL superstars who scouts have deemed have the most promise and are going to be the future generation of the sport. But we turn towards the regular season. Training camps have officially opened, and many teams are starting to figure out who they have. Washington, here in our home backyard, losing Jason Chimera this offseason, losing Michael Lotta. People question whether or not they're going to have the ability to go all the way again. Even though last year they had a very early exit, but Washington is built for a win-now organization. So it'll be very interesting to see how they turn out this year. I got to say, my biggest sleeper team in the East is the Detroit Red Wings. They got a lot younger and they got a lot faster. Losing Pavel Datsyuk was obviously very hard for them to kind of overcome, and he's going to be very big shoes to fill. But I think that they've supplemented it with a lot of young talent. New York Rangers are hoping that Henrik Lundqvist can give them one or two more very good years and eventually have to phase in a new goaltender. Mackenzie Skapski, who's in their farm system, is coming back from injury this year, and he is eager and ready to go. The Rangers are still built from defense to offense. They're relying heavily on Brady Shea and Dylan McIlrath to really set the tone and fill that sixth defensive spot where Keith Yandel, who left for the Florida Panthers, had vacated. The Rangers up front are getting a lot younger. They added Mika Zibanejad in the trade for Derek Brassard, and they also signed free agent Nathan Gerbe and Michael Grabner. Both very interesting. Grabner coming from the Islanders and Nathan Gerbe coming from Columbus. Well, however, that's all the time we have. There's going to be more previews of NHL hockey and more World Cup of Hockey coverage next week on SportsZone as we come back. But stick around for more SportsZone after this. Hello, welcome back to SportsZone. This is our final and favorite segment, Thumble. Thumbs up, thumbs down, where we talk about the good, the bad, and sometimes ugly in the world of sports and the world at large. So we're going to dive right in. I'm going to go thumbs up first to the University of Michigan for being the first team in NCAA history for putting the Michael Jordan Jumpman on their uniform. It says a lot about where Jim Harbaugh and his lovely khakis are taking that fine organization. Thumbs up to the Battle at Bristol. Took a record crowd, and apparently, according to ESPN's Aflac trivia question, that game alone, their expected crowd and their then attended crowd, trumped the 2015 home attendances of over 41 FBS schools. So hats off to the Battle at Bristol. It was a great game. Thumbs up to college football as a whole this week. I know we really didn't get to cover it much, but lots of good matchups. Definitely Alabama's still rolling, and everybody's kind of doing what they need to do. Thumbs down to the New York Jets for losing. Everybody's already on Nick Folk's case. Not his fault. Darrelle Revis needs to learn how to cover AJ Green. Thumbs down to the Patriots because why not? They're really, they should be losing with Garoppolo. We need our 4-game buffer, but obviously that's not how it's going to work, and he's going to be the second coming of Matt Castle. Thumbs up to the New York Yankees for actually being in a pennant race. However, they lost their first game yesterday, so now they're going to be losing the next 7, and then they're going to be out of said pennant race again. Thumbs up to the Champions League, and thumbs up, thumbs down, however you want to look at it comedically. Arsene Wenger and Jose Mourinho did refuse to sit next to each other at the Premier League meeting this year. I think it's quite hilarious. Jose's back. It really hurt my feelings last year when he left Chelsea. It gave Vince and I not a lot to talk about, but it's happy that he's back. Him and Arsene Wenger are going to be it's going to be a good time on Studio 90. Thumbs up to the World Cup of Hockey starting next week, and pre-season exhibition games this week. I have to go work both of them tomorrow as I am an employee for the Washington Capitals organization. Also, just thumbs up to Dan being back. This is my first show with Dan Lignato back at the helm. We missed you in Copenhagen last semester, and we're really glad you're back. And thumbs up to Vince, being our associate, whatever, producer. Vince and I were on a lot of segments last year. It's nice to see him get rewarded for all of his hard work. And then just Cody Cohen unfortunately couldn't be here, so just his quick thumbs. Thumbs up to the weather because, yeah. Thumbs up to the beginning of the semester and everybody making it past ad drop. Come on. And then thumbs down to school and work. Come on. But anyway, that's all my thumbs. I'm going to turn it over to Jake.
Come with me, table. You are my only friend. All right. Thumbs up to Chandler Cartanzano, one of my favorite new kickers in the NFL this year. He brilliantly helped the Patriots win the one game that I had in this 4-game slate that I was afraid of. So bring it on, Jets, Dolphins, Texans, Jets. Thumbs up to Jimmy Garoppolo for exceeding all expectations and playing with great poise and promise. Also, thumbs up to Josh McDaniels for making full use of Martellus Bennett and the returning James Devlin to mask the shortcomings of the offensive line to keep Jimmy Garoppolo upright for most of the game. Thumbs up to Bill Belichick for having the foresight to know that Darrelle Revis would decline, and that signing him to a multi-year contract would not be in their best interest when they have the stud that is Malcolm Butler on their way. Thumbs up to Vikram for his first show. Thumbs up to American University Rugby for winning their one and only preseason game this Saturday against West Potomac Men's Club by a score of 28-21. Great to see a lot of young players come out and succeed. Thumbs down to the tragic, mournful loss of the one and only Keenan Allen to the tragic ACL tear that he sustained yesterday, Sunday, for whoever watches this upon upload. That is all I have, though, so I will be turning this over to Vikram.
Finally, we'll go thumbs up. Central Michigan beat Oklahoma State in college football over the weekend with probably the play of the year, even though it was only week 2. The Hail Mary lateral for the touchdown. It was pretty incredible, even though the officials later said that that play shouldn't have been run because of some poor officiating before that. That play was impressive nonetheless. That's all for me, so we'll let Dan finish out the show.
Alrighty. Oh, slide. Hello, America. I'm going to start with, I'll give a thumbs up, Vikram. Welcome aboard. Yeah, it's great to have new cast members, staff members, crew, whatever we are. Good to have new panelists coming out to SportsZone. I will give a thumbs down that Cody couldn't stay. It's very sad that he had to leave. I will give a thumbs down to myself because I don't know how to read a schedule. I bought a ticket. I bought a ticket to the Nats game on Wednesday, intending to go after my class got out because I get out of class at 5:30. So I didn't realize that it's a 4 o'clock first pitch, so that is not going to work very well for me. So I spent the money on the ticket, and I probably won't be able to actually go to the game. So that's poor planning on my part. Thumbs up that the Mets are somehow managing to keep it together long enough to look like they're in a wild card race right now. Seth Lugo and Robert Gesellman deserve a ton of credit for the pitching that they're doing without Jacob deGrom and Steven Matz and Matt Harvey. So credit to them. I will give a thumbs up that football is back, even if my Jets did lose. Thumbs up to Quincy Enunwa on catching his first touchdown. Played all of last year, never caught a touchdown, but he did in the first Jets touchdown of the year, like everyone expected, was Quincy Enunwa. Think that's it. I'm out. I got nothing left. So thank yous. We got thanks to Vikram for coming, Jake, Vince, Ryan in the back. Jessica was here. I'm Dan, of course. So for all of us here at SportsZone, I think we will sign off. Follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook. And all of that stuff. We'll be back next week. We'll see you then.